Hi, this is Lives Touched by Pets, a show for those who love and are loved by pets. I'm your host, Lisa DeSatnik, certified trainer with So Much Potential in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm really glad that you're here. Welcome. Here's a complaint of many parrot owners. My bird screams way too often, way too loud, and just plain I can't stand it. Here's the thing, birds communicate with their sounds. If you live with a parrot and you're struggling with your bird's excessive screaming, this episode is for you. My guest is a friend and colleague of mine, Barbara Bingham. Barbara is a very talented certified professional bird trainer and a certified parrot behavior consultant based in Arizona. She lives with 5 birds, a cat, and a horse, and consults with a lot of pet parrot owners on their behavior issues. Are you ready to learn? Let's get started.
Barb and I go back so many years. We were just talking about that off air. It's been I don't want to date myself, but it's been a really long time.
It has been. I think we met through Susan Friedman, Dr. Susan Friedman, who's one of our favorite people and mentors.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Susan is the one who got me involved in just wanting to learn about animal behavior from the get-go. I mean, I was an animal person when I was little. I was the kid that would come home with everything, but nobody knew about animal behavior back then. I really got started studying behavior when back then I got a third bird. I no longer have 3 birds, but I got my third bird, who was Barnaby, my African gray, who thought the coolest thing to do was to scream. And that was not cool with me by any stretch. And everything that I was reading online was about negative stuff. And so I just started searching. And back then, Yahoo groups were around. Susan had this group that was teaching parrot owners around the world about applied behavior analysis as it relates to parrots. So I jumped on and totally changed my relationship with my pets. And that's also the reason why Barnaby to this day is a prolific human talker and screams far, far less. But yeah, that's when I first met her, and I had no idea what applied behavior analysis was, but
that's what happened to me as well. I heard her speak at a conference for ABMA, Animal Behavior Management Alliance, great group, and everything just fit into place. I hadn't known about applied behavior analysis, but it makes so much sense. And that's what's so fun to talk with clients about and spread the word, because that's how we can deal positively with all our animals' idiosyncrasies, which are natural to them, but they're so tough when we bring them into the house.
It's such a cool way to look at behavior.
It is,
really?
And it works for all behavior. It's even humans, although humans get all their so much reinforcement outside that it doesn't work quite the same way. It works the same way, but not as well, because they can go get reinforcement somewhere else.
I have used it. I mean, it's just how I think now a lot of times and my dealings with people, and that would be a fun conversation to have at another time. But yeah, when I was doing public relations, my previous career, it was really helpful then. It was helpful when I was working with some troubled young kids. It's helpful just in my relationship with kids and with my parents and everything. But yeah, I mean, so applied behavior analysis is what really did me in, and then I couldn't stop learning because of my days of public relations, I just felt this desire to share the word. And so this is long before I ever considered doing anything professionally, but I reached out to an editor of a local magazine and said, we've got to share this stuff. And she was like, yeah, we do. Susan actually helped review my articles for the first few years to make sure I was on point. And that column is still going strong to this day, all these years later.
That's
yeah.
wonderful. And that's Susan. She's so generous with her information. And the big takeaway that I like to give people is that to take responsibility for your animal's behavior, because we are their whole world. When we take them into our house, we control everything, and we want to give them control of their behavior and in a way that works for us and works for them. And that's what applied behavior analysis does for me and for others. It's a new world, and it's so fun to share and so important.
You know what? Because I bet you there's a ton of people that are going to hear this that have no idea what we're talking about. Why don't we share what applied behavior analysis is?
Applied behavior analysis takes apart behavior and looks at why the behavior is occurring, the antecedent, what's happening before the behavior, and then specifically a behavior, not looking at everything, but looking more finely and seeing what the antecedent is and what the behavior is, and then what the consequence is. And as you know, the consequences are so important because they drive the behavior. It's the future behavior that we are affecting. We can't do anything about what has happened already, but we can change our behavior to change the animal's behavior.
Exactly. So, and by antecedent, we could be talking about the animal's medical condition. We could be talking about the environment, the proximity of the animal to whatever it is. We could be talking about time of day, the amount of rest the animal has had, all kinds of things that factor into making that behavior more plausible to happen. And then there's the immediate ones that are like, for example, a bird that bites you, it can't bite a hand that's far away from him, right? So proximity is definitely there. There are things that we're going to talk about with regards to screaming with a dog. There's so many different things, and we can talk about antecedent arrangement to help to solve problems too. That's management.
And we become aware that everything around us and the animal affects their behavior. So if a stranger, a guest, or a trainer comes into the animal's environment, a new person, it really changes the way the animal will behave. And so a lot of times I like to have videos of what's going on. Videos first give you a really great perspective, but it also shares how the animal behaves, how the bird behaves in its home without all the new people and attention from the training. So that's so important, and that's one of the big ways to change behavior is to rearrange something in the environment.
Exactly. Now we're kind of off on a tangent, which I love to do, but this is really important because when we talk about screaming, we've got to look at what are the reasons for the screaming and what is reinforcing the screaming. From your perspective, what do you think, what are some of the causes of problem screaming that you've seen?
Well, first we want to look at why are they screaming, because all behavior has a function. We don't just behave just willy-nilly out of the blue. We all every living being behaves for an end, to get something, basically to get something or get away from something. And when we hear screaming, it's not to bother us. It may be that they just are enjoying their well-being and they are just enjoying being alive. But what we can do, and it may be to get people to come often, and it may be because they're scared, but what we can do is redirect how they scream, how they communicate into something that's much more pleasing to us, that works for them and works for us.
Yeah. You know, that the whole reason that I got started studying what we started talking about was because when I brought Barnaby, who then was a 3-month-old Timna African Gray who loves to imitate, and he came into my home. And at the time, I had Chester, who was an Alexandrian ringneck, very not so nice scream, but he didn't scream that much. Chester was just a ham that got into everything. But when I brought him home, he thought the coolest sound to imitate was Chester at like some god-awful decibel all day long. So what Susan taught me is, again, when we're looking at ABA, is, he's communicating, which is just what you said. So we started looking at, okay, so first of all, what can I teach him to do instead of that? So we started thinking about a whistle, right? But then I didn't realize that an African Gray can whistle at the same decibel level as he can scream. And I very quickly learned that was not going to work. So thankfully, I just started when I came in, and I'm embarrassed that I taught him that I'm mommy, but I did. And so I would come into the room and I'd announce, "Mommy here." And he started picking that up. And so very early on, when he would scream, I would go completely silent. And then if I'd hear "Mommy here," I would bolt into his room and give him stuff to do. And you could tell when he started catching on, because no sooner did I get out the room that I'd hear "Mommy here." I'd go running back. And that was getting so tiring.
But that's so important, isn't it?
It is, because he was seeing value in that, and there wasn't any value. I just seemed to not hear him when he'd scream. So he didn't want to do that so much. But then I had to come up with a different plan, because I didn't feel like running into his room every second. So then we had to, then we look at the enrichment piece. So how can we give him a lot more to do so that he would need to call me less? And so it was that kind of 3-pronged approach that really made the huge impact. And to this day, I no longer have Chester. There's so many different stories I could share about having Chester. But to this day, that's why I have a prolific human talker in Barnaby, is because I don't hear screams. And so what's interesting, though, is that I do have one other bird, Dreyfus, who's really, really pretty old for her age. And she's, for the most part, really, really quiet. But every once in a while, she'll let out a scream. And so Barnaby, it's so interesting, because I can tell if he wants to communicate with Dreyfus, he'll scream. But if he wants to communicate with me, she'll scream and he'll say, "Barnaby's a good boy."
That's adorable.
Cute.
So a couple things I wanted to point out is, when you say you don't hear screams, you actually do, but you're closing them out of your head so that you're pretending you don't hear them. And that makes it much easier to ignore. If you just say, I don't hear it. And when actually in reality you do, but you're
Yeah.
telling yourself you don't so that you don't react. It's funny that I have 6 birds, and one of them's an African gray, and fortunately, nobody has picked up on each other's screaming. So that's whenever I have a bird over, I'm concerned that my birds might pick up on the screaming of the new bird, because that's often what they're coming to learn, is to vocalize in a different way. But my birds haven't picked up the screaming. It's interesting how well this works. When I first got my scarlet macaw, he was screaming and biting, and most of the words started with an F. And the reason was because that's what he was taught. The previous owner who gave him away was banging on the cage and saying, "You effer." And that's what Ari learned. His name was Rambo, but he was saying "bad Rambo," and everything with Rambo was negative and punitive. And so I don't think it's important to change a bird's name except when they have such a negative association with that. And so I changed his name to Ari, and I gave him attention for everything that wasn't objectionable. And to this day, he still remembers them because they always have that behavior in the background. You don't forget a behavior, but it doesn't work. And so the only time he uses it is if the cat runs under his cage or something, he'll go, "You effer," or "What are you doing?" And that'll come back. But generally, always, he doesn't use the words that I don't reinforce. And that's what's so important about screaming, is if you give any attention, even laughing, then it reinforces them for what they just did. So if they're screaming and you sigh, then the bird goes, "Yay, I got attention. It made a difference. And I'm going to scream again in order to get attention." And it may even be bad attention. It may be that somebody goes and covers the cage, but they're coming towards the bird wins. And it's not a competition. What it is a work to get the bird to understand how to communicate with us in a way that works for us and works for him or her.
Yeah.
So our behavior is everything, and taking responsibility for what your bird does, or your other animals, and even spouses and people, kids, taking responsibility for your behavior affecting their behavior is so important.
Right.
Big piece.
And you have a house full of birds. And we're not talking about just little cockatiels. We're talking about big birds with big voices, and a cockatoo is among them, and they have very loud voices. So what do you do to control the volume in your house? How do you handle that?
So all the birds I have were given to me or thrown at me. One of them, the cockatoo, was actually left. I said I can't take any more, and they finally left him on my front porch in the summer and called me and said, "We can't take it anymore. He's yours." And I did have them come back and sign him over and give me more information on what he was used to, because we want them to come into our home with some consistency. Consistency is so important. And we don't want to repeat what isn't working, but it's good to know their food and things like that. So we don't change everything at once. And what I did with Boo, he was honestly one of the worst birds I've ever met. And now he's one of my best friends, and he's just wonderful. He would scream horribly, incessantly, nonstop. And I had to do what you're talking about. I don't hear him. And when I don't hear him, yes, of course, it's driving me crazy, but I don't give him any attention, any signal that I do hear him. And when he's doing anything else, then that is more acceptable. So he's making other noises and sometimes being quiet, although it's hard to reinforce quiet. We can, but it's much easier to reinforce another sound, so that he learned that screaming chases people away, and all other sounds that I had to teach him are get attention. So I would when he was quiet or stopped screaming, I'd say, come here, hi, things like that. And he did pick those up because those started working for my attention, and the screaming chased people away. So what he does now is he'll go, hi, really quietly, and it's adorable. And and he knows one of the things that really gets me is if he says, I love you, which is something I've told him. I didn't teach it to him, but he's picked up. And he'll say, I love you, or hi. And then I come running. And nowadays, I don't have to come running. I can just say, that's nice, or I love you too, some response. But at the time when he was learning, every single time I had to drop what I was doing, and had to is a good word for it, because if you're not consistent, he won't learn, the animal, the bird won't learn what to do instead. And they will resort to what has worked for them, which is the screaming. So the screaming did not work with me in my home, and other behaviors did. If he was playing with a toy, I would run in and tell him good and hi. And if he would make another vocalization, then I would literally drop what I'm doing and run in and tell him how good it was at first. Then he learned what got attention and what didn't. And I could say, I hear you, I'll be there. Or, wait, I'll be coming. And just the contact would be enough that he learned I would be coming soon enough. And that worked much better than screaming. So the screaming diminished and then went away. It's still there. If people come in my house, what he does now is laugh. And that always gets attention. But if we're looking at the other birds and ignore him because there are other birds and other things to do in life besides pay attention to Boo, the cockatoo, then he will at some point resume screaming. But what I try to do is make sure that I acknowledge his laughing. And if we can, we'll go over there and give him attention so that it's always being reinforced. And the screaming, we leave the room. So they do resort to screaming if they aren't getting what they want for a while. But if you're consistent and make it a priority, then you won't hear screaming anymore.
The other thing you probably are doing too is giving them a lot more enrichment. And
yes.
Talk about the role of enrichment when it comes to screaming.
And as you say, Lisa, it's so important to give them enrichment, which is something else to do. And so he has toys. A lot of times they don't play with toys right away, and you have to give them attention for playing with toys. Teach them. They learn that playing with toys gets attention, saying things softly, and sounds that we like get attention. And so that's what they learn to do in order to get attention. And all the screaming will subside. All of us behave for a reason. And a lot of birds, they're so social and they're so intelligent that they will do what works to get attention. And so if they're screaming and the people say, quiet, then that's getting attention, and it's actually reinforcing the screaming. You'll hear more screaming when you say quiet. You'll hear more screaming when you walk over and cover a cage. Now, everybody's an individual, so your mileage may vary. And what we do is we look at the future behavior. If what you are doing is working, you will notice that the screaming becomes less and continue doing what you're doing. If the screaming increases or maintains, then what you're doing isn't working. Even if it's a textbook answer, it won't work for all individuals. So there's no recipe. There's always ingredients that we use, and we then look at what the results are. So if your results are getting better behavior in the direction you want, then you continue that. And if they're not, even if it's something that you've been told will work, it's not working for your individual, then you have to change something. And there's so many objects we can change and behaviors for us we can change. So we change something in the environment, which is, it might be even moving the cage to a different place. Whenever we're in a different room, think of going to a new classroom or walking into a store, and you behave differently. You behave differently with friends than with new people. And so everything you change will change behavior. Behavior is constantly changing, learning how to get what we want, how to get what they want, and how to not get what we don't want, how to stay away and avoid behavior we don't like.
Right.
The problem is understanding that some of the behavior we intend to be punishing or reduce the bird's behavior is actually reinforcing it. And that's where looking at future behavior and deciding what works and what doesn't work for that individual bird.
Yeah, exactly.
And it also matters what happens if a bird is raised. If it's raised by the parents, it's a lot less attached. It will become attached to the people because it's social. And if the people treat it nicely and reinforce the attention the bird gives to them with proper attention to the bird, then you get to have a great relationship and life becomes harmonious and wonderful. If you're attending, giving attention to what you're doing and how the bird is reacting, how the bird is behaving back to you. However, a lot of birds are raised as the babies are taken, the chicks are taken, and they're raised by people, and they become very attached to people.
Mm-hmm.
And both parent-raised and hand-raised birds can be wonderful companions, but there's a tendency with a lot of the hand-raised birds raised by people that they become very attached to having a human around.
Yeah.
And so we have to understand this and be very gentle and forgiving with how the bird is behaving, because everybody's just doing the best they can
Sure.
to survive and get what we want.
Right.
And so knowing applied behavior analysis, that it's the antecedent, it's something that cues the behavior to occur. And then very importantly, it's how we react, how the consequence makes the bird behave and invites the bird to behave in a certain way. So the consequence is very, very important. It's also it's a good idea to change behavior by changing the environment, the antecedent, and making it so one of the ways to curb screaming is to give the bird attention now and then, enough so that they don't need to scream. Why is your bird screaming? It's scared. In that case, maybe we don't have it right by the dog park window. Although some birds would find that really interesting, some birds would start screaming every time because they don't know what's going on. We don't know why they're screaming,
Right.
but it encourages them to scream so we can move the bird.
Yeah.
Some birds are doing contact calls because they're social and they want to know where the other members of the flock are. And you're one of the members of we as people, humans in their homes, are one of the members of their flock. And it's important to them that they know where we are and that they're getting attention from other members of their flock. And so they make contact calls in the wild, and they will do that with us. And that's a distinct, repetitive, often annoying sound that they make, and they want us to answer. So at first we can answer and say, I hear you. And then we can also we can make a sound like hi from the other room and teach them that that's a better contact sound, and then reduce our responding to the annoying to us contact call, and changing that to, if you say hi, I'll give you attention. And that means consistently running into the room and giving them the attention at first so they learn this is what works. This is my new contact call.
Which is exactly what I did with Barnaby.
And it works so well.
It did.
Now, some of the birds, even African grays, have had a background where the African gray I have was actually, they were scared of him, so they kept him in a room and didn't take him out, and they didn't want their dogs to bother him. So he was actually closed in a room bigger than a closet, but it didn't have any windows, and he had no contact with people.
Yeah.
And so he picked up sounds and was actually, he says a few words, but basically he's a joy because he's learned to whistle and hum and click and all that. But he's an African gray. He's not so prolific with words. So we always need to consider that the individual and their learning history may influence behavior. And it's not that he can't learn words if I made that a priority, but I really enjoy the sounds he makes. And so I will repeat back the sounds and play bird sounds for him or take him outside. And it's a joy to hear him happily vocalizing, but not talking. That's his choice.
Yeah, yeah. When I had Chester, so Chester didn't scream a lot, thankfully. But it was funny because the dynamic between he and Barnaby. So Chester was just, if anybody has had ringnecks, they're just so comical. And he would do all these funny things that you couldn't help but laugh at. The problem was when he was doing it, it was kind of egging Barnaby on to then start screaming. So part of my strategy had to be, I have to make sure that Chester is so busy that he's not going to be thinking about how do I tease Barnaby. So, Chester, they're also voracious chewers. And so, making sure Chester had a ton of stuff that he could go through and chew and do things and work through. Really created harmony in my house. So it was part of my strategy there was it wasn't just about Barnaby, it was also about Chester. Anytime you've got dynamics between living beings, there's that dynamic. But making sure definitely that they've got stuff to do. Numerous clients that I've had about screaming issues, a lot of it has so much gone away when we've just added so much enrichment to the bird that the bird no longer has as much need or desire to need to do those contact calls because he's so busy with other things. And so that has really been wonderful. You know, happens a lot. And then there was another one we were working on, and that worked really well. But one problem she had was when she'd go into the laundry room and she'd turn on the washing machine, that was a trigger for her bird to start screaming. So before she went, strategically, she would give him stuff to do before she would go in there to do the dryer, and then she was, you know, she could do it, come out, he was still busy with things, she'd give him a little bit more, and then that tended to solve her problem. So yeah, I mean, you know, there's just so many different ways, as you said. It's about, you know, what can we do to arrange things so that they're practicing it less? And then what skills can we teach them that they can do instead? And, you know, enrichment, and no matter whether we're talking about dogs or cats or birds, it's so important when it comes to behavior issues and behavior.
And enrichment also helps with if my birds start chewing on some wood in my house, I've taught them no, not as a punitive, but no as information. No, that's mine. This is yours. And I hand them something that they are allowed to chew.
Yeah.
So we always want to fulfill their needs, but we can do it in a way that works for us as well.
Right.
And one of the enrichment things that I like is to give the bird a bell. It has to be a bell that that is not going to be super annoying. But all of my birds that I have came to me because they were screaming and biting. And Copper, my Sunday conure, was screaming as shrill all the time. And what I taught him, he would ring a bell and I would give him lots of attention. Again, I would stop what I'm doing and make him the focus. I would stop what I'm doing when he rang the bell. And so now, instead of screaming, he will go and ring this bell. And it's changed our lives. I don't mind the bell being rung, but the screaming can drive you nuts.
Yeah.
But again, you can't react to the screaming, but you do give a lot of attention to the other things that they're doing. And
Right.
You can change behavior so well. You can also manage the behavior, as you said, with giving them something before you leave or before you have an important phone call. I give my birds pellets. And it's a complete diet, so it's wonderful that they don't pick out certain peanuts and sunflower seeds and then safflower seeds and leave the rest of the food. So I give them pellets, which has a nutritious formula for every bite.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody uses pellets, but I do. And so all the fresh foods I save for when I'm going to be having a phone call or I'm just about to leave. I'll give them their fresh foods. And that not only is that a signal, has that become a signal, a cue that they're going to be on their own for a little while, whether I'm there or not, but it also gives them something to do. And they look forward to the times when I'm not around because that's when they get their fresh foods. And I also don't give them nuts and treats unless they're being quiet or they're doing something I like. Often they're so quiet, they're so occupied now with their toys and stuff, I can walk around and just give them treats for breathing and doing what they do all the time. And that's fun. It doesn't have to be a trained behavior. It's just for good behavior. There's so many times when we think, I don't want the screaming, I don't want the biting, when the better way to look at that is what do I do want? So I do want them to eat their food instead of screaming. I do want them to ring a bell instead of screaming. I want them to play. We don't have to have expensive toys. We can give them a bottle cap. We can give them a yogurt container, a piece of paper. And we can also give them enrichment where we put some food inside the paper that might be confusing at first. So maybe we just lay a piece of paper over their food bowl and they have to pull it off or push it off, and then they can eat their food. And then we can gradually, in approximation, small steps, we can teach them that the food is in the paper. It can be on the paper. Then we can start twisting it and give them enrichment, stick it around their cage, and they can walk around, they can climb around and gather their food through a fun way of finding it and cracking it or unwrapping it.
Yeah.
Because in nature, we certainly don't find birds going to the grocery store or having bowls set out. So it takes a lot of their time is spent foraging and playing, and that is something that we need to reproduce so that they don't spend all their time waiting for us and screaming to get us. There's so many different ways, and it depends on the individual, what what works for that individual that's kind and appropriate.
Yeah.
And it's always future behavior, isn't it?
It is. This has really been fun. You and we could talk for hours about all this stuff because we're so passionate about it. But I think some of the takeaways, I guess, to summarize for people, one is, you really want to look at the function of the behavior. So we're looking at the behavior and what are, the consequences of the behavior.
Why are they doing it?
To look at what's reinforcing it, but also look at things in the environment, things that are happening before the behavior that are setting the motion for that behavior. Those are called antecedents. And so that can be anything from providing more enrichment for your bird, with location. We talked about lots of different ways that you can manage things so that you're making it less likely for your bird to need to do these behaviors. And then you're also watching for, as far as consequences go, that you're not reinforcing the problem or the unwanted behavior while you can be teaching new skills that work for both you and your pet. And so I think those are kind of the big takeaways that I'm seeing from this.
Yes. And it's always the individual. We can give them something that we think is good for them, but if they're not interested in it, then it's not useful. However, we can give them looking at it and playing with it and touching it attention and teach them to play with it.
Yeah.
So it's all up to us and how to make our behavior work to get their behavior, which works to get our behavior, and it becomes a conversation rather than a demand and a monologue from us or from them. It becomes working together, living in harmony and peace, which is very possible with an alien species. It's so fun.
I love it. Barb, tell people how they can find you if they're looking. We've got it in the show notes too, but go ahead and share that.
My website is harmonyanimalbehavior.com, and that will have a contact page. You can also find Lisa and me and other certified parrot behavior consultants through the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants, IAABC, and they will have a list of all the parrot behavior consultants, and you can see who works for you or works near you. I think that actually Zoom works very well with
Yeah.
with working on behavior, partially because we don't go into their home, and so they're not distracted by a new person, and also because so many of these are giving you ideas and seeing how you can apply them, and
Right.
watching to see that it works, and giving
Yeah.
you ideas if you need some new thoughts and tweaking.
Sure. Yeah.
So harmonyanimalbehavior.com is me.
Okay.
I'd love
great.
to talk with you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This was really, really fun. I hope this was a lot of good information to share with folks. So we'll do this again sometime.
Thank you.
Talk about a different issue. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to my podcast. Come back often and tell your friends. If I can be of any help to you and your pet, please reach out to me via my website, www.somuchpotential.com. And for a lot more information, fun, and videos, please follow me, So Much Potential, on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. See you soon.